So we'd like to start our session by the Dr. Imran Matin, Executive Director, BRAC Institute of Governance and Development, BIGD, BRAC University. Sir, please.
Oh, sorry, I missed.
Thank you very much. I think whoever is standing, if you can decide, talk a bit on research integrity and social commitment. What I'll try and do is actually try and explore the connection between these two areas. And I think what I'll try and argue is social commitment is central part of research integrity. And then I'll come up in conclusion, I'll try and come up with some ideas forward in terms of how to move forward with respect to enhancing the interface between these two. So to begin with, I think I'll take a slightly different perspective on how until now we've been thinking about integrity. I mean, the way I'm thinking about integrity is from a research point of view, and from that point of view, integrity really comes from the word integer, which basically means a state of being whole and undivided. And it is related to the concept of coherence, to a sound structure of thinking, and it is related to the concept of being internally consistent. So these are slightly different ways of thinking about integrity than the kind of moral framework through which we were looking at integrity in the previous session, and that's the kind of notion that I'm going to use as I elaborate my argument around research integrity and social commitment. So research integrity is primarily about high quality and robust practice across the full spectrum of the research process. Right? Every research has a process, and integrity is about maintaining high quality and robust practice across that spectrum. And some of the key steps of the process, and this is, we all know it, but just to kind of, for the sake of completeness of thinking, is design, is implementation, is recording and reporting of results, is dissemination, application, and exploration of the results. So these are some of the fundamental steps in a research process. And research integrity is really about high quality and robust practices across each and every steps of this process. Now, if you think logically around these processes, you can come up with lots of different areas, lots of different things that are really important in each and every of this step. And one of the big principles around this step is do no harm, for instance. And it is central to the design and implementation part of the whole research process and research integrity. There are other principles that are really, really important. Principles of thinking through very carefully about counterfactuals, for instance, is extremely important as you think about designing a research, right? As you think about identification of a research problem. The identification problem is sort of central to research integrity. So these are all kind of important steps in a research process throughout which we need to be thinking about research integrity. Now, the other dimension of research integrity and why it is important is research. Ultimately, when you are conducting your own research, it's not an individual process. Actually, your research is part of creating credibility around a research community as well. So it is by nature, it has got contagion effect, right? So integrity becomes very important because there is a positive or negative externality to your work. And whenever there's externality, normal markers don't really work, and you basically need to have other mechanisms, right? So each and every individual research creates positive and negative externality. Well-conducted research helps in creating credibility of the research, other people's research as well. But a bad research starts diminishing the credibility of other people's research as well. So your personal work actually has a positive and negative externality, and I think that part is extremely important in terms of research integrity and the value of research integrity. Okay, so the other very important point in research integrity, especially around the sort of more development economics, the discipline that I come from, and particularly in the evaluative revolution that's been happening over the last 15 years around a randomized controlled trial, is actually creating new frontiers and new standards of what we call research transparency. And research integrity and research transparency are actually quite closely connected concepts. And I think, this whole research transparency right now involves huge amount of scrutiny around, you have to post your research, you have to pre-register your research, you pre-register what your hypothesis is for everybody to know. You have to develop pre-analysis plan, right? Even before you actually have the data, so that you cannot be selective and take only some part of the results and ignore the rest to make a salient point. You have to actually submit your pre-analysis plan, and then you actually have to create replication files so that others, anyone else, can take your data and know exactly the analysis you have done and should be able to replicate your exact results. Now, I realize that in lots of other disciplines, this would be, doing this in this way would be quite challenging, but I think the principle of where standards of research transparency is moving is something that's worth noting. And if you want to play into that global research space, I think it's really, really important that we pay attention to what is happening around the world. Now, moving on to social responsibility. Now, we understand what it means. It's primarily an obligation to act for the benefit of society at large. In a very simple way, that's what social responsibility is. Now, I would like to basically argue that social responsibility is integral to research integrity. Right? You cannot be thinking about research integrity without thinking about your social responsibility. Social responsibility creates a very important and powerful ethical framework to be thinking about research integrity, and especially for us working in social science primarily, this is absolutely critical. So social responsibility is integral to research integrity, and we need to think about social responsibility throughout the research process as we think about research integrity as well. So I think these are extremely closely interlinked concepts. Right? So that's, I think, quite clear. But I would just like to, to conclude, I'd just like to sort of propose a few ways in terms of how we can move forward. Now, before I do that, I think just one point, which is, increasingly one of the biggest challenge in evidence and research is confirmation bias, what we call echo chamber, right? We are really not very good at reasoning. We're not very good at challenging our own biases. We are very good at finding evidence to support our own positions, and we are really terrible at changing our minds. Keynes famously said, when facts change, I change my mind. What do you do, sir? I think that's one of the most difficult things to do, and I think that's extremely sort of challenging. And I think that actually is really the heart of this whole confirmation bias and the kind of echo chamber and the kind of politics that we are seeing in this post-truth world of all kinds of fake news and fake evidence. 3 actions I would like to propose for us to move forward. First of all, I think we need to increase the standards of practice of research transparency. I think we really need to leapfrog and really adopt those standards of research transparency that are good practice globally. And I think we can do that actually. It's absolutely possible. And in the previous sessions we talked about PhDs and but I think within BRAC University there are 3 institutes. BRAC itself has a research and evaluation division. All of these institutes and the research functions actually produce pretty high quality research. If you look at the kind of publication record that these institutes and the research functions at BRAC has, is enviable. But it is not yet following the standards of practice in terms of research transparency, the kind of standards that I mentioned before. And I really think we need to really comply with that. So that's the first thing. The second is, I really think we need to create deliberative space. We need to create space where we can speak truth to power, And by that I mean two things with that. First of all, I think we need to create deliberative space where no one has the final say and no one has personal authority. These two principles are critical to creating genuine deliberative space where proper interrogation can happen to further advance knowledge and research. Right? And I think we really need to create that. I think we are just, we are too sort of constrained by listening to our own thoughts and really not having the environment to speak truth to power. And I think we need to really do that. Otherwise, I think we'll become a land of dead ideas. And finally, I think we need to democratize and open up research space. And by that, I essentially mean connecting research with practice. And I think that is another very, very important way in which research integrity and social commitment can be connected. And BRAC University, with a kind of amazing laboratory of practice and innovation that BRAC has, is in a unique position to really do that. And I know we have been talking about that for a long time. We just need to find good ways to really make that happen. Because I do think this is really also central. So 3 things: step up our standards in terms of research transparency, open up really proper, genuine, deliberative space for dialogue and challenging ideas, and thirdly, connect research with practice. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.